Hello and welcome back to NDESTE Ireland. I'm Charlie Bannon. So happy that you can join us today. And today I'm continuing with my series on the science of near-death experiences. Now, the science is kind of possibly a little bit dull, but it's important, and I'll tell you why it's important. Okay, first of all, if you've had a near-death experience or a deep spiritually transformative experience, you do not need the science or anyone to tell you that what you experience is real, okay? You know that for yourself. However, we live in a world where there can be misunderstandings, and if you've been in an accident where you've been unconscious or maybe lifeless for a point, and you come back and you're telling the paramedics or the medical professionals about this wonderful experience that you've had, they may, through misunderstanding, believe that you're having a psychotic episode or that you are mentally ill, and they may refer you for psychiatric evaluation. And if you're psychiatrically evaluated by somebody who doesn't know about near-death experiences or doesn't know about the science of near-death experiences, then they may end up mistakenly labeling you as mentally ill. And I know that has happened to people, and it's not justified. So that's why it's important to get the science out there. The science is for, I guess, it's for others. It's definitely for mental health professionals. It's definitely for medical professionals. It's for those who have been misdiagnosed, and it's for those it's for people of the present and of the future in order to prevent misdiagnosis, okay? And I guess it's also for the families and loved ones of people who have been misdiagnosed. You know, they tend to believe the doctor, you know, possibly, potentially. And the doctors, let me tell you something about doctors. Okay, doctors have saved my life, so I'm not going to be critical. But doctors are human too, and all humans are capable of making mistakes. And after I had meningitis and I was big into brain health, you know, there's a doctor in California, Dr. Daniel Amen, and he says, question your doctor, because not all doctors qualified top of their class. Some of them barely scraped through, you know, but we tend to forget that. We see the title and we think, oh, they know what they're talking about. And by and large, they do. But as human beings, doctors are limited, and we're all limited, and I'm limited. So no harm to expand our understanding. And science is the language of medical professionals and mental health professionals. So the science is out there, it's just not widely known. So I am crediting Dr. Bruce Grayson and his book Hereafter, and that looks backwards on the screen. But anyway, he is a psychiatrist himself, came across near-death experiences very, very early in his career, at the beginning of his career actually, and he was so fascinated by what he was witnessing. He says he hadn't come across anything in his psychiatric training to explain what was going on with people with near-death experiences. So he did 40 years of research and summarized it in this book called After. And okay, I'm not getting any commission for the sale of this book, none at all whatsoever. I just want the knowledge to get out there, so that others are not misdiagnosed and that people are more clearly understood. And you know what? If you're watching this video, you are probably a spiritual person like myself, but I've had the experience of, in my younger life, being a religious person, and then later on becoming a complete atheist, then getting philosophical, and now being a spiritual person. So I can understand the perspective of different people, you know. When you're an atheist, science is what you hang on to, you know, and if the science can't explain it, then it's just unexplainable, you know. So that's from an atheist point of view. And I've seen in my work in the mental health service, psychiatrists who probably are not religious. I don't know if they're religious or they're spiritual. I know some of them are not. But I've heard presentations in front of the whole multidisciplinary team of cases of people who had out-of-body experiences and who were spiritual healers. And the conclusion, simply using the science, was that they were not mentally ill. Okay, so it's important, especially as someone who sits in on these meetings in the mental health service here in Ireland, it's important to get the science out there so that people, whatever their background, be they religious, atheist, philosophical, spiritual, that it's something we can all avail of in order to prevent misdiagnosis. So that's why I'm putting this out there. So, okay, chapter 2 of Dr. Grayson's book, like a river. Chapter 2 of Dr. Grayson's book is called Outside of Time. Okay, so he talks about timelessness. Am I saying that right? The lack of time, time not existing, timelessness. Okay, I'm tripping over my words here. So, okay, it's just chapter by chapter. He goes through different features of near-death experiences and explains the science. So, in 1892, in the Swiss geology professor Albert, a difficult name for me to pronounce here, Albert von St. Gallen Heim, first published a large collection of near-death experiences in the yearbook of the Swiss Alpine Club. And Heim himself had a near-death experience. He was a keen mountain climber. Not surprising for somebody living in Switzerland. He had a near-death experience when he fell off a cliff edge while mountain climbing. And he had seen many falls in his lifetime and was horrified every time he saw them. And sometimes people died, sometimes they survived, sometimes the survivors were physically disabled or in shock, and he dreaded the thought that it would ever happen to him. But it did happen to him. He fell off a cliff. The fall lasted for about 5 seconds, and he had a hugely expanded awareness of thinking and a slowing down of time. And he documented all the thoughts that went through his mind at the time. And a further thing is that he said it was extremely peaceful. The whole experience was extremely peaceful, which is probably what you wouldn't expect, or what I wouldn't expect. But the lack of time, or the expansion of time, or time ceasing to exist, it's like you get into a space where time does not exist. And I'm thinking of someone else I know who had a near-death experience and was in a coma for 3 days, but during her experience she felt that she'd been away for years. So that's really interesting. So just a moment, we'll be back very shortly. I need to check my book for a moment. Yes, I know what I was going to say now. Okay, so Dr. Bruce Grayson, with his medical training, heard about, in his studies, he'd come across what happens to the brain when there's a lack of oxygen getting to the brain. And of course, it's very dangerous. I've seen cases of brain damage because of lack of oxygen getting to the brain. And sometimes even death can happen with lack of oxygen to the brain. But near-death experiences, despite lack of oxygen to the brain, when people come back, with the lack of oxygen, the conventional science would say that you cannot think, but Dr. Bruce Grayson came across people coming back with extremely clear thinking and very, very expanded thinking. So that's interesting. And I can tell you myself, like I mentioned, I had meningitis in 2018. It took me 2 years to recover. It took several months for my brain to come back online. Because I couldn't think of simple words like book or cup, yet my consciousness was fine. I was aware of everything. So it was almost like, even though there was brain damage there, and my brain is fine now, it has recovered, but it took 2 years to recover, 2 years to recover fully, as doctors predicted it would. And of course I tried to, no, I'm going to be fine after 2 months, I'm going to be fine after 3 months. I wasn't. Yeah, so even though my brain wasn't working, my consciousness, which my soul was perfectly clear and understanding, and um, could understand what was going on. It's like my son was saying, I can't find my book and I can't find my cup, and I could not find the words to say your book is on your desk in your bedroom and your cup is on the kitchen table. My brain was that impacted that I could not say those words, but my consciousness knew exactly where his book and his cup were. And I was going, how do I say that? What are the words? you know? And so it's interesting how consciousness and brain are two different things. Now we get onto that in a later chapter. But anyway, so I'll read you about Hein's near-death experience from chapter 2 of Dr. Bruce Grayson's book called After. So he says, as he fell 66 feet down a mountain, that would be about 33 meters. Would it? Yeah. But no, not 33, 23 meters. As he fell 66 feet or 23 meters down a mountain, his body crashed repeatedly against the rocky cliffs. He wrote that he had watched people fall previously and found watching others fall to be a terrifying experience. But when he himself was falling, it was, to his shock, a beautiful experience. He reported being astounded that he was feeling no pain at all. Chaim was so affected by his experience that he started talking to other climbers who had survived potentially fatal accidents, and he quickly found 30 other stories that were similar. Chaim described his thoughts speeding up as he fell. So this is what Chaim wrote. What I felt in 5 to 10 seconds could not be described in 10 times that length of time. All my thoughts and ideas were coherent and very clear and in no way susceptible, as our dreams, to obliteration. First of all, I took in the possibilities of my fate and said to myself, the crag point over which I will soon be thrown evidently falls off below me as a steep wall, since I have not been able to see the ground at the base of it. It matters a great deal whether or not snow is still lying at the base of the cliff wall. If this is the case, the snow will have melted from the wall and from the border around the base. If I fall on the border of snow, I may come out of this with my life, but if there is no more snow down there, I am certain to fall on rubble. And at this velocity, death will be quite inevitable. If when I strike I am not dead or unconscious, now this is 5 to 10 seconds, see how long it's taken me to read this. If when I strike I am not dead or unconscious, I must immediately seize my flask of spirits of vinegar and put some drops from it on my tongue. I do not want to let go of my alpenstock, perhaps it can still be of use to me. Hence I kept it tightly in my hand. I thought of taking off my glasses and throwing them away, so that splinters from them might not injure my eyes, but I was thrown and swung about, so that I could not muster the power to move my hands for this purpose. A set of thoughts and ideas then ensued concerning those left behind. I said to myself that upon landing below I ought, indifferent to whether or not I was seriously injured, to immediately call to my companions out of affection for them and say, I'm all right. And my brothers and 3 friends could sufficiently recover from their shock so as to accomplish the fairly difficult descent to me. My next thought was that I would not be able to give my beginning university lecture that had been announced for 5 days later. I considered how the news of my death would arrive from my loved ones, and I consoled them in my thoughts. Objective observations, thoughts, and subjective feelings were simultaneous. And then I heard a dull thud and my fall was over. So that's just an example of the how much thinking can be condensed into 5 to 10 seconds. Okay. So Dr. Grayson goes on to say, among all the experiencers I've interviewed, half described their thinking during the NDE as clearer than usual, and almost as many described it as faster than usual. And he goes on to say, a feature associated with rapid thinking is a sense of time slowing down. So going on to further findings of Dr. Bruce Grayson, he says a more extreme version of this slowing of time is an experience of complete timelessness, a feature in many near-death experience accounts. So a guy called Joe Grushy tells about his experience of timelessness as an example. He says, I knew what it was like to experience eternity where there was no time. It's the hardest thing to try and describe to someone. How do you describe a state of timelessness where there's nothing progressing from one point to another, where it's all there, and you're totally immersed in it? It didn't matter to me if it was 3 minutes or 5 that I was gone. That question is only relative to here. For Joe, time not only slowed down but seemed to disappear entirely. Many people who have had NDEs describe a sense of timelessness. Some of them say that time still existed, but that the NDE seemed to be outside the flow of time. Everything in their NDE seemed to be happening at once, or they seemed to move forward and backward in time. Others say that they realized that in their NDE that time no longer existed, and that the very concept of time became meaningless. Among all the people who shared their near-death experiences with me, 3/4 reported a change in their sense of time, and more than half said they had a sense of timelessness in their NDEs. I noticed that this slowing or stopping of time, along with the speeding up of thought processes, were more common in NDEs that couldn't have been anticipated, as in sudden car accidents or in heart attacks in apparently healthy people. They were less likely in NDEs that might have been anticipated, as in medical crisis in people who knew that they had a fatal disease, or in people who tried to take their own lives. When these changes in thinking and the sense of time do occur, they often appear at the beginning of NDEs and seem to be brought on by becoming aware of the threat of death. The connection between time slowing down and the suddenness of a close brush with death is something I could have discovered only by analysing a large sample of NDEs.